So it's a very great pleasure to look out on this august gathering and to see so many friends, old friends and new, who've gathered this morning in order to help us to celebrate the 50th anniversary of this Abbey Church, designed by the architect Francis Pollen, built very largely by Mr. John Lyles, who's somewhere out there in the audience. There you are, John. Quite a lot of it with his own fair hands. And in more recent years, the interior design of the Abbey Church was augmented and updated by Thomas Heatherwick Studios, and we're very honoured this morning to have a distinguished member of the design team, a distinguished member of the studio, the architect Fred Manson, who will be speaking to us in just a moment. After Fred has spoken, he will take us through both what Pollen has achieved, I think, and also what the Heatherwick team undertook when they attempted, and very successfully attempted, to complete the interior of the Abbey Church just over 10 years ago now. That team, who worked with Thomas Heatherwick, included the then Abbot Christopher Jamison, Abbot President now of the English Benedictine Congregation, who we're also very honoured to have with us this morning. After Fred has spoken, we'll then have a period of conversation between Abbot Christopher and Fred. The three of us met in London to sort of rehearse that about a month ago. It felt a little bit like an episode of that Radio 4 show, The Reunion. So you're going to get a replay of the reunion, I think, at a later point this morning. So once again, everyone's very welcome. We're still getting one or two people looking for seats. So while we're doing that, I won't yet quite hand over to Fred. There we are. I think we're just about there. So, Fred, it's a great pleasure to have you with us, and we look forward very much to listening to what you have to say. Could I ask everyone to welcome Fred to our session?
I'm absolutely amazed. There's a room full of people on a Saturday morning to come out to hear just a talk. There must be more interesting things to do in Three Bridges on a Saturday to come here. But I am impressed that you're here, and I hope that I can give you an insight into it. What I think Francis Pollen did a remarkable design. It's a truly amazing building. And I wanted to try to explain why I think it's a good building, and perhaps give some insight into what it tells us about Worth and what it tells us about monasteries. So I decided that really the subject is the relationship between design and belief. But then I realized you probably don't want to still be here on Tuesday. And so I decided to reduce it down to the relationship between architecture and monastic habits, which is still a very big subject, so I have to speak very fast to try to get through it in my allotted time. And we start by talking about rooms. This is the Heatherwick Studio, as it was a few years ago. We gather once a year and take a photograph. You can't quite see it, but we're all jumping up in the air. We tend to go to buildings that we have designed, and this is Coldrop's Yard in London. You can almost see what the studio has done. They've taken two parallel buildings and then just taken that roof and wrapped it up. A simple kiss in the center and then comes down again. By that simple means, they've achieved a space in the center, brought the two buildings together. And that kind of economy is what is really very interesting about what we did. But I wanted to then talk about monasteries. And I thought that one of the ways of finding out about Worth is to look at several other monasteries. And I've chosen three, and let's see if I can find that one. Yes. This one is in the most remote part of Provence, Le Tournai. It's 12th century. It is Benedictine, and it didn't last for more than about 200 years. Interestingly enough, I thought when I was this, it has a refectory, it has a church, and the monks, you, could move there today and know where you would go, how you would walk around it, what you would do, I think the only things you would miss is there's central heating only in one room and no flush toilets. But other than that, I think you could fit in quite well. That's one of the clues about monasteries. Monks do the things the same way every day. And therefore, for an architect, this is absolutely wonderful. Most architects are offended by the people who occupy their buildings by doing things to them that weren't accepted. The architect Mies van Roo of the last century was so worried about this that he actually bolted the chairs to the floor in the position they were supposed to be in to ensure that no one, even the people who bought the house, owned it, would upset it and move it around. When we're dealing with monks, we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to bolt the furniture down, or the monks. They'll do the right thing every single day. And they've been doing it for 700 years. This is a 12th century church. And it's still understandable as a monastery. It has some fantastic rooms. This happens to be the church. And that when I was there, I found out there was also a music box. Someone was singing. As soon as we came into the room, she was embarrassed and stopped walking. But that is a special room, designed very particularly for being a place where people worship. And music was brought into that, an integral part of what is there for a building. So that's our first example. The next example is from 1960. Le Corbusier designed a monastery for, I'm told, Dominicans. And this is a perfect, neatly compact monastery. Cells at the top, communal rooms there, the church end, all ready to be gift wrapped neatly as a complete and happy monastery. I also think it's a very good building. As part of our visits, we went to this one, which is from the end of the 20th century, Nové Dvůr in Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic. Designed by John Portman, and it is another example of a modern interpretation of a monastery. I mentioned that there's specific rooms within a monastery, and the part which is interesting about this is that they induce in the people who are there an act of behavior, and that can be brought into representation in buildings. We're back now in the 12th century, Le Tournai. This is the cloister, which I actually think is the monk's representation of the world. And it is here a wonderful, delightful building. But look at that little hexagonal building in the center. What is that? I'll tell you. Before the monks go into their meal, they wash. And this is an ablutions room. But it's so designed that the monks look at each other across the basin. They form themselves into communities. They prepare themselves for going in to have a meal. It is creating a ritual. It is creating something which is associating them, bringing them together. And this is an architectural expression of something which is integral to the whole meaning of what you are doing in a monastery. And I think that is a case where ritual, architecture, and belief have come together very, very strongly. But you may say, all right, washing your hands before a meal, come on, that's not much. Let's try another one. Death. I have been told, and Abbot Mark's book goes through this, that the ritual of the death of a monk is always an important part. Here at Worth Abbey, the body is laid in the church overnight and then accompanied out of the building and down to the burial ground. That's a ritual which copes with the things which are there. Now in this photograph here, that's a door. That door is only opened when a monk has died. And the church has been designed so that it takes this ritual and gives architectural expression to something which is profoundly important. This is, oh, I've gone the wrong way. This is a section through the building. Here's the church. 9 Not only do they go out this door, but they go down a very steep flight of stairs. Yes, of course, the ground level was here, and that was perhaps a practical reason. But think about it. Saying farewell to one of your colleagues, going down those steep stairs, carrying a casket, means that you do not ignore that as an example of life, of death, of the church, and of your rituals. Again, the designer has come up with something perhaps practical, but also very, very powerful in its meaning and what it does. And the monks, when they're in their church, on their pews, look towards the end. And they know that the only thing which is there is a staircase going down. A reminder that someday, maybe not too far away, they may themselves descend down that staircase. So that we have a point here where our design suggests something that can happen, but only the operation can give it meaning and significance. But the suggestion can be powerful, and the meaning can bring people together. So there's something there which is also linking design and monastic belief. Many buildings take a long time to build, and they come as they go. And I love this photograph. I think it's absolutely marvelous. I've looked at it so many times. I have not yet found one woman without a hat. But the only thing which was in the church was the hat as well. And maybe the hats have been abandoned because there's no longer just a hat for the church. But this shows the process of building something, of doing things which were priorities. Their priority, first of all, was the church. And secondly, it was this incredible roof which defines much of the characteristic and importance of the church. I don't know quite how Worth decided this, but they chose an excellent architect, Francis Pullen, to design the church. I have to own up, I'm not a specialist in Francis Pullen. I don't know any of the details. You could tell me 10 times more about this church than anyone else here. I'm speculating, and I'm making comments which are my opinion. I hope they're not that far off the truth, but they are one interpretation, not everything. So I want to go through and show you, by showing you some slides of how the church design developed, of my understanding about design and belief. So, this is an early design by Francis Pullen for the church. And you can see that there's an awful lot going on. And you can't read them, but this is the epistle ambo, and that's the gospel ambo, separating out. There's 2 staircases going down, there's 2 chapels, there's rooms along the back, and everything's there. He's tackling several things. One, 260 boys, frightening prospect, and 150 people from the public, which have to be incorporated within a building. I'm going to suggest that we all know the idea of abstract thinking, but this is an example, if I would call it, if it wasn't also a building material, concrete thinking. By drawing something very specific, it means that they can balance things, but they know it's not a design. And I'll just give you a preview. That's what it looked like on the outside. Forget it. But everything has been incorporated, because the profound step of design is that design is a synonym for compromise. And you have to compromise one way or another. But a designer, I assert, does this to put everything down on a page. It's a thinking diagram. It was never meant to be built, but he had to think about the structure. He had to think about how the light came in. He had to think about how it was on the site. And he got it so that it was monastically correct, that this is east and that is the east side of the church. But there's one other thing that he did here, which is about the Vatican Council. Vatican II had just happened. And there are some profound, new, different things that he had to deal with. And you look at it, and there's a circle here. And the circle has the altar in the center. And what he's actually showing is he realizes for the first time from the Vatican Council, the altar is there, and the priest has to turn 180 degrees to face the new group, the congregation, which is an equal part in the service. Those are profound steps. And this building is trying to come to terms with that. But he knew that something in the center doesn't work. So he did an oval, which is saying, somehow I've got to get a circle and a big space to work together. This is a crude, crass way of doing it. But I think it shows his thinking about it. And he then started to simplify. Don't need two elbows. Don't need these things around the sides. Don't need this piston here. And incidentally, both of those stairs go down to a crypt, which is one other way of dealing with the death of a monk. But not really worked out. Let's go to that other slide. What he did have to think about, however, was how the structure works, how the outside expression from the inside works. And reading this, it seemed to be way out into the landscape, and that it was an incredibly ambitious scheme, ambition being a good step. But I can almost hear the sigh of the relief 50 years later when the monks were shown this. We're back in the realms of reality. I could see this being built. This is something which is much better than the previous one, which really, really frightened me. But it didn't quite get there straight. A square pyramid, 4 completely unnecessary pyramids around the sides. He got this bit working, but it was a step along the way. But he was actually commissioned to do a monastery rather than a monastic church. His priority was the monastic church. But he then came up with something which surrounded on 3 sides. Would never work as a monastery. In my view, it still doesn't work as a monastery. And it was a problem that was never solved in this particular problem. But he went back and saw that the square didn't work. And I think I'm going to assert that one of the things was this absolutely spectacular setting. You cannot get into this church without looking at that view. The 500 acres that came with the land when the church bought it. But he then decided, yeah, it's a beautiful view, but I'm going to ignore it. Part of the reason, I think, is because is why he wanted to put the monastery around it. But it helped him a great deal. There are other places where they look out at the countryside, but he wanted something that was more controlled. But Mark pointed out to me that you also, not quite from this height, but you walk down from it, from the road to here, to down, and then down again. And those are modest steps. It's not that you're rising up to a church, but you're descending into something which is in the landscape. And what we know is that we came up with this church. This is the way it looked when Francis Pullen left the church incomplete, probably for financial reasons. It was incomplete when the head didn't have the walls around the outside, but probably not functioning. And I cannot talk about the brickwork when you're here, but the profound building here gives you an enclosure which is wonderful, rich, and you remember the thing which is outside, but you're not there with it because you're inside in an enclosed, focused space. And finally he got back to the idea of the circle, but introduced a square. So he found that he had something which was a square building which regulates it, gets rid of the tyranny of the circle, but it also means the circle which focuses on the center, which is the altar. But he had a problem. As we know, there's a circle half as equal to the other side. Neatly, by bringing in the 2 side chapels, tweaking them slightly, he made the space for the monks equal to this, but this one much bigger than that. A very, very ingenious solution. It also means that the chapels are brought into the middle of the space, and that they are part of the church rather than separated out from it. But there's something which we don't quite talk about. The absolutely wonderful lantern. Pullen actually wanted to put in a false ceiling because he wanted the lantern to be the show-off bit. But that lantern is solid concrete, dangling above you in a terribly precarious way. Unbelievably expensive to do. How the monks understood, and maybe they didn't know that they were paying. But there they are, putting this thing in. Which is another point. I think something about design is to challenge things that have gone beyond and to find a way of doing something which is both old and new. And I'll show you a few examples. This is the abbot looking directly away from the important thing in this photograph. This is a barrel vault. Gives a really nice feeling in Navi Devor of the cloister. You walk around it, this thing gets it. But there's not a single column here. So this thing is dangling out in space. Bah! Nothing to hold it up. That's a real show-off. I can do this. That's easy. And that's the sort of thing which then gives tension in reality. And I don't think you quite register, but there's this looking straight into the courtyard. And that is all done in an incredible, complicated way. I'll tell you an example that I can tell you more. Remember I said this was a simple connection between these roofs, and it is, in one sense. But technically, it is anything but simple. There's a construction photograph which shows the dangling bits of the below. But look at this one. This comes up, that comes up, and they should touch. They don't. The amount of steel which goes into there, the amount of effort, the bending moments which occur from there, is really quite something. So much time was spent in the studio to see this, the impression of this was very small. Just that little bit hanging down below. This is a complex, simple solution. The perception is simplicity, but to get to that simplicity requires huge complexity. So let's go back. We don't quite notice that this huge drum, lantern, is there, hanging in space, suspended out of nothing. And it could have been that, which I don't think is quite the same. What comforts me is when they built this, Francis Pullen looked at it, you know, that looks pretty good with the roof going up. I think I'll keep it. Abandon the idea of the false ceiling, but to make it look a bit better, he put some elm cladding in between them. And I think we now assume that that's the natural, logical, correct thing to do. But it is a great comfort to me that not only did Pullen, like other architects, have to struggle to come up with a design, but when he got it done, he saw that he hadn't quite got it right and was prepared to change his mind. Oh well, I did say a false ceiling, but no, I'll go for this. And that's what we get now. Not this. I mentioned the tyranny of a circle, and around the same time, there was another circular building built, the Liverpool Metropolitan Cathedral by Freddie Gibbard. And I think comparing the two will show us why I think Pullen really came up with a good idea. Not this one. Here you are. Gibbard couldn't work out when he did a circle how he was going to get things to fit in, so he crammed in as best he could bits all the way around the outside. Not a happy solution. And from looking at this photograph, you then begin to understand why Pullen wanted the lantern. People say when you have a dome, you just look up at the top. And there it is. Good stained glass, yes. But actually you should be paying attention to the altar, which is, oh, there. They tried to put this in, which doesn't work. It was a conundrum of a circle. And then the poor monks are sort of in a zone out here. Nothing to do with describing a space. Nothing to do with explaining the relative relationship between those two people. And then when they come into the side chapels, they don't quite know what to do. They've got pieces all along, and it is not, in my view, an effective use of the circle. So let's compare the two. You look at Liverpool, you don't quite see the altar. You don't quite understand the space which is there, and your eye moves directly to the top. Our Worth focuses everything on the altar. It seems a calm, pleasant space. The side chapels are brought into the whole place. The area of the monks is precisely the right size. The audience is there on the other side. These are really, really interesting design issues which are springing from responding to the things that they wanted to show for the church. One of the things I don't understand about this church is I was told it was designed as an Abbey Church, but it was of course going to have the boys from the school. It is now also a parish church, and it works well in both respects because it's large enough for a parish to come along. It doesn't have to have the monks there, but the monks, when they are there, in a completely appropriate way. So I'm saying, in design terms, simplicity is hard won. Taking all the different things that you have to accommodate, acoustics, structure, sound, function, and then simplifying them down to one matter. But there's another kind of simplicity. And why Worth Abbey is a profound church is that it is a space with a certain force not dependent upon, sorry about this, just being a Catholic church. I think many people from any kind of faith can come into this church and say, wow, I like this space. This is powerful. It's done with very simple and economical means. It could have been much worse. I think many people would look at this and walk out of the room. It's reconfirming beliefs rather than establishing them. And there's an important point, as I was saying, design suggests, and then people interpret, whereas this is design imposes, which is not necessarily a good step. Anyways, the Heatherwick Studio was asked to complete Francis Pullen's building. And Colin Amery, the man sitting in the center of the photograph, apparently suggested the Heatherwick Studio, which was a brave step. We're considered renegades by a lot of people, and we do have good fun. But it was good for them to appoint us, and it was a fantastic commission. We spent a lot of time, like this showing, working on it. My regret is that we were basically asked to complete the church rather than complete the monastery, which is still an unfinished project in my mind. As part of that, we went and visited Novi Devur, which is why I can tell you about the stairs going down, which was also a profound experience. We were in a silent monastery, instructed to go and help dry the dishes after our meal. We may be guests, but we did pay our way. That was quite interesting. They also understood that there were rooms. This was the old part of the building, which makes the refectory, and a very powerful suggestion for that. Each room in the monastery can and should have its identity, its function, and its way of working, as strong as that which we see in the church. But what did we as a studio do? And I have to give total credit to this to Thomas. We were talking about a church which is a square within a circle. It's resolved a number of problems which we've seen before. But how do we bring those two together to create something which is going to be interesting and powerful for our furniture? And this is the drawing. What is expected and correct way? But there are lines which are drawn through the entire church, which makes each of the pews specific to its location. And the lines are represented, the pews, by white ash, and the timber between the things is American black walnut, both of which we found out by careful study. One other thing which this shows that we did is the issue about churches as axes. And there was a very strong axis which led to nothing here at the end, which I think was part of Pullen's intention, not to put something there. But by making this an arc, we came to something which more or less completed it and made where the monks sit a very important part of the whole church. Also, when you go up and look at it, you'll see that the most extraordinary pattern which emerges from this parallel lines is only right at the center of that piece. And I think that's pretty good, though almost unintended. Here it is, filled with happy parishioners, all people in their right place, in a place which appears to be calm, controlled, and I think more serious with this edition than it was before. This gives you a sense of what we did for the monks. Not closed off, a simple character for them to put their objects on, and kneeling there. Great fun designing this particular piece. And this is a romantic photograph, isn't it? But it shows the white ash and the black walnut, and it means now actually the elm which they put on the top of the building dome, elm no longer there, ash is going the same way. You're becoming almost a historic monument to trees which Britain has lost. Not really what was intended. And there's the focus. I think it gave a real focus to where the monks are, in a group, together, not two rows, no priority. Of course, in the center, there you see this, you can see it on the screens, you can see it outside soon. It works together in a good way. Incidentally, we spent a lot of time in the ambo, because we were told that it needs to go both ways, to the monks and to the congregation. And we designed that in this wonderful piece of stonework, which is there. Don't you love the photographs of the pews? We did a lot of research. The wonderful benefactors who made this possible came along to the studio as well. We had full-scale mock-ups built to see that it was going to work. We interviewed people. One of the contractors we interviewed said, "You can't build this. It's just not possible." Another one said, "You can build it. How much money have you got?" We did find a company that was going to do it, and we went to see them. This is in their factory, under construction. The extraordinary amount of effort they went into, full marks for what they did. Each piece is, you see the little piece underneath, I should point here, which holds the thing together and gets it to be lined up so they can then put the next one in place. It involves the most extraordinary amount of bolting, connecting, and if you know anything about timber work, when you're gluing, you've got to get the things at the right time and the right place to fit exactly like that. Otherwise, it won't take. And when there's that many pieces fitting it in, there should have been some danger signs. As you know, perhaps, at one time we came out fighting about a court case, which was unhappily resolved, but I still think that you got good furniture and it could have been built better. Who knows? The whole construction was amazing, but this photograph actually shows you that power of that lantern. But what we did was we removed any stuff around the outside, simplified it, and made it even more powerful. The simplification process was really important. But I also like this. Look at the power of that photograph. Go back to this one. When you put all the lights on, it's boring. It's just dull. It's flattened. It hasn't given any meaning to it. Whereas when you see this, that's a real place, even though it's got scaffolding coming down the center. When I was preparing this lecture, believe it or not, I went back to think about what I'd done in the past, and when I was at university, we had an architectural professor who assigned us a book a week to read. And I was so frightened that I actually did read these books. Many of them were very good, but one of them has stuck with me. It's called Gothic Architecture and Scholasticism by Edwin Panofsky, a man forced out of Germany by unfair treatment, which we hope is past, or has it? He was a Marxist, but a brilliant thinker. In 1951, the Benedictines in America asked him to give a lecture, which was then published in a book in 1957. And I dutifully read this book until I came to the last page, and I found it truly, truly extraordinary. What was it that he said? I'll read it. Here, scholastic dialectics has driven architectural thinking to a point where it is almost, oops, come on. I'll read it here. Almost ceased to be architectural. So what he realized was that in the centuries he was dealing with, 12th and 13th century, there was this dichotomy between design and buildings, and that he asserted that there was another prospect, that the two could be brought together and be the same thing. Architecture and scholasticism and belief. What he was talking about was a time when, as he says in the book, total sum knowledge of humanity could be encompassed by a few people. And they could debate those things. They also had a respect that the texts that they were using were contradictory. They were never going to find a single answer, but it was going to be a discourse. And that the people who were designing their buildings were brought into the scholastic group to talk about it. He's talking about a design that was done by an architect who was not a monk. But it makes one think that maybe I'm making a false perception between the role of design and belief. Could not the two be the same? Yes, but design is a skill, and not everyone has it. There's a monk, or there was a monk in Belgium who was an architect and he designed 2 Benedictine monasteries. I can't remember, Van der Linde, I think his name was. And they're good. But it lacks the spark, the inspiration, and the character of, say, Le Corbusier's monastery. And I think there is a good reason for bringing to a design question a person who is good at design. And then that means that we need to think about I'm lost now, but never mind. We'll just deal with this in a moment. No. Something's come up and I can't get it off the screen. Hey? No. I got almost to the last slide without any technical failures. What I think Worth did was that they knew they needed to go to an architect, a designer, Francis Pullen. But they also knew that Pullen was empathetic, sympathetic, and understood what they were trying to do. And despite all the technical and emotional things that were going on, you at Worth have got a church which was designed by somebody who was profoundly religious, in my view. And he was able to bring that to bear on a project in an incredibly interesting way. And that's why I think Worth Abbey is an exemplary example of a good piece of architecture. I'm not going to talk anymore.
So should we sit down?
I don't think so.
So use that. That one's live. If you want to. Hello. Just test this one. There we go. Great. What a fantastic presentation, Fred, really. It was a joy. There was an element of the reunion about it, as Mark said, but what you've shown to us is that a great work of art can always be explored afresh, time and time again. And I think you've illustrated to us really, really well why the Abbey Church is a great work of art. And I think you've also shown how the Heatherwick Studio understood that they weren't just putting pews into a building, because Thomas said to us that he wanted to put an art object into a great work of art. In other words, he wanted to add another piece of art to a great work of art. And I think you've shown, again, the complex simplicity of the pews, which has proved more complex than any of us would have wanted. But the complex simplicity of the pews speaks to the complex simplicity of the building, and I love that insight. Just a little bit of anecdote to add to the background to the pews. When I was abbot, one of the things people constantly said to me is, "Oh, Father, we can't hear properly in the Abbey Church." And so I thought they have a good point. The acoustic was complex. So I got Ove Arab sound engineers to come one Sunday morning to attend Sunday Mass and to then give us an analysis of what the sound issues were. And they were brilliant. I mean, Ove Arab's an expensive firm to deal with, but it was a good example of, you pay for the quality. Because very quickly they said to us, look, you've got multiple problems here. The first of which is squeaky chairs. And I said, what? They said, yeah, you've stopped noticing. But all these second-hand Ministry of Defence chairs you bought, which incidentally I'm astonished to see half a dozen of them have reappeared at the back of the church. Have a look at them as you go out. They're worth seeing because we'd stopped noticing how squeaky they were. But when a reading was going on, there was a background squeaky noise. And they said, that's your first problem. Get rid of the chairs. The second problem, they said, was that because you've got the balcony protruding from the back wall, the sound hits the balcony and then hits the back wall and comes back to the congregation at 2 speeds, so that the sound is, mushed together, and so very hard to hear. And they said, so you've got to do something at the balcony, and you haven't mentioned that, but the studio put in that piece of convex wood to match the wood too, and that's a very elegant solution as well. So the squeaky chairs were the start of the project in a way. And the outcome, I think, is, everybody agrees, whatever the technical problems with the chairs, the look of those, or the technical problems with the seating, they look magnificent in the space. And I wanted to add one other piece too, which is a Spanish woman. I brought a copy of the book actually, which I think you know. A Spanish woman was writing a book about light in architecture. And we could just focus for a moment on the light. You've talked about the lantern, because the lantern is the vehicle for the light. It's like a giant light tube. And she was writing a book about light in architecture, and somebody suggested she should come here. She came here, and the woman who accompanied her said she walked in and looked around and then began to weep, because she was so moved by the use of the light and the whole design. And she actually puts a photo of the Abbey Church in her book on light in architecture. So I think I'd just add to your talk that the background to the squeaky chairs giving way to the beautiful art object that is the seating, and also the use of light in the space without having to have big plate glass windows that take you to the beautiful view of the Downs, bringing the light in from above. This is all amazing, amazing stuff. So what I'd like you to say a bit more about is your final trailing of your coattails about scholasticism and Gothic architecture. I didn't fully understand it, so let me try to say what I think you're saying, and then you can tell me I'm getting it wrong. I think you're saying that the view of faith that the medieval Thomas Aquinas scholastic understanding was taking over from the sense of architecture as art, namely that the balance between design and belief got out of joint, that there was too much of the faith and not enough of the design. But I might be misunderstanding. Tell us about it.
Wow. Scholasticism was a process of thinking and describing, and that they went through the path that was preceding the last page in the book is talking about not fighting or even arguing between design and architecture, but understanding how their belief system is represented in buildings.
Right.
And the extraordinary discussion about if this column comes up to here and it goes to there, what does that mean in terms of scholastic meaning?
Right, yeah.
And then this one goes to there and it should be consistent. And there were two things that they were talking about. One is the overall consistency and the other is the clarity. And they wanted to achieve both of those. And what he goes through and demonstrates is that this cathedral tried this, didn't work. This cathedral, oh, that's a good idea, but it's not quite right. Wait, no. Finally they come to a solution. And it is almost that discourse between things and the realization that there is out there a solution which is going to find what they're looking for.
And are you saying that it ceased to be architectural is what surprised me in that comment?
Yes. The architecture becomes so much a demonstration of the scholastic view that it is almost a diagram of scholasticism
rather than a piece of art.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. And of course, one of the buildings in Europe that illustrates, if you like, the alternative to that scholastic style is Sagrada Familia.
Correct.
In Barcelona, where he has the architect has rejected the idea of the Gothic arch, and he's replaced it with pillars that are a forest of trees. And so that's another example, if you like, of the architecture representing a faith belief. And he wanted this church, so on the one side you've got sunrise windows, on the other side you've got sunset windows, and in the middle you've got these columns which are the forest, which have flowers and things coming out of them in a way that's rarely been seen in a church. But he absolutely rejects any arches. It goes up and then it's the roof. And I suppose that's an example of somebody rejecting the scholastic thing at the start of the 20th century quite strongly.
Gaudi's church is Gaudi's church, and you can't get away from that. Yeah. It is Gaudi doing Gaudi for you, and you admire Gaudi for what Gaudi did. And that there's nothing that you can into it. You give up everything when you go into his church to one person's point of view. And I think that isn't very good.
Yeah.
What scholasticism actually believed was that these were universal truths, which would be communicated to many other people without explanation and without having to give up. You participate in it as an individual rather than bow to the great genius.
Yeah, and we often don't know the names of the architects of the great Gothic cathedrals. And so what you have is a system that is pointing you to heaven the whole time in the great Gothic arch, and the length of the church with the altar at the far end, where the sacred mysteries take place, often behind a screen and so on. And so what's interesting, you're right, that in Vatican II, which the Abbey Church is a product of, you do have this alternative vision of the people of God with the clergy and the people each in their designed space, together celebrating the mysteries at the altar in a more open way. But what I think's interesting too is what you seem to be saying is that here in the Abbey Church, it's not a monument to Pollen himself, it's a monument to the monastic design. Can you say a bit more about that?
He is directing his skills to serve you.
Yeah.
He is directing his ability as a designer to make something which has universal interest, and that he does that by economic means.
Yeah.
It's really down to you, who built the building to give that meaning to it. And the brickwork and the quality of it, the choice of the color, all adds to something, so that someone can walk into the church and cry because of its power.
Yes.
Because of what he generously offered without saying, look at me.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And I'm very conscious that we have in the room a man who laid many of the bricks with his own hands, so to speak, or oversaw the bricklayers. John, would you like to say a word about what keeps the lantern up? Because if I give you the microphone, John, tell us the magic of how the lantern stays up, because it's not quite what you think. John Lyles, gentlemen, the clerk of the works of the Abbey Church.
Used to public speaking, but the theory of the lantern staying up, what holds it up is the ring beam above the light, the windows. All the time that ring beam is in one bit.
Compression.
The lantern stays up because you've got the rib beams, which are T-shaped, tapered T-shaped. They go from the ring beam up into the base of the lantern and are locked up there. All the time that ring beam is in one bit, you're all right. As soon as that ring beam goes, you've got 100-ton of rock in the middle of the church.
Thank you, John.
On the problem of the acoustic,
Yes.
when the church was first shut up,
Yeah.
Francis got building research down to do some tests. And they started off with a 10-second echo. And that is why the plywood is up in the roof, and it's got an acoustic quilting behind it.
Right, thank you. So there, we'd never know that the acoustic quilting is there. Thank you so much. So, thank you, John. That's so yes.
Beam, surely the essential thing is the cable going around.
Yes, there's a cable inside the ring beam. Yeah, and that had to be tightened.
When it was cast, there were tubes in it with cables, and when it was all ready, they tightened all the cables up, then grouted them in, and then they dropped the scaffold from underneath, so it became tense.
But having a carpet means that the sound goes into the carpet. If you took the carpet out and you found the acoustics would be a lot better.
Or worse.
This is what I've been told by a professional musician.
I think it would be better for music, but not for the spoken word.
Oh, okay.
One of the things I was involved in building our little theatre we have in the school, and a designer said to me, "You know, I have a space that's good for the spoken word or good for music," and so I opted for the spoken word, and it's a dead acoustic. You want a dead acoustic for the spoken word. So there's a little bit of a compromise. There's a little bit of reverb for the music, but not the great Gothic reverb, if you like, that you have in Gothic churches. But it would be right for music, it would be better, but it would make the spoken word much harder. And I think it's really important that the spoken word of God is really important. Yeah. Fred, over to Fred who wants to ask me.
It proves my point that design is about compromise, and you have to decide what you're going to do. But when I was doing my talk, I was thinking about this saying, I'm asserting that buildings have an impact and that people will come away with their faith, in my view, changed by buildings.
Yeah.
And I wondered, you've been in the church a long time, you've been in a lot of places, where in your mind was your faith and a building brought to bear to each other?
So that's a great question, Fred. So first of all, I grew up as a student at Downside School, and I realised that being educated in the great neo-Gothic Abbey Church of Downside had a profound effect on me. I didn't realise, but I used to enjoy just sitting in the Abbey Church, doing nothing in particular. And I realized that what I was doing was a kind of contemplative prayer without realizing. And it was just very natural for people to do that in that space. And I realized it was having a profound effect on my sense of the contemplative dimension of life. It's a very beautiful church. It's a classic. It's an imitation of Westminster Abbey in some ways, but far less cluttered than Westminster with its monuments. It's got a noble simplicity of the Gothic. So that was one. I have to say, Novi Dvor, our visit to Novi Dvor also had a profound impact on me because it was a kind of epiphany of what design can do for faith. Precisely that, for all the reasons you explained. It's a place where John Paulson, the great British minimalist architect, met the minimalism of the Cistercians. And it was just an epiphany. It was what I said to Thomas. Thomas preserved the airline napkin on which during the flight home, he began to sketch out some design ideas. But it can have that effect, and I think the steps down to the graveyard, so that the monks are in choir with the altar and the steps down to the graveyard. So every time you came to pray, you'd see the steps down to the graveyard. St. Benedict says in his rule that monks should have death before their eyes every day. And you thought, well, that's putting that line in the rule absolutely into concrete. And so Novi Dvor was, and of course Paulson's a very secular architect, but he did understand the Cistercians really well. And the sense of the transcendent in that whole place, to the extent that we were all getting very excited and walking along the cloister chatting, and then the abbot emerged from his room and went, he was French, right? Silence, c'est un cloître cistercien. It's a Cistercian cloister, keep quiet. It was a terrific moment. We were told off roundly. But I think that there can be buildings to do that. But the second thing is too, the faith that in Jesus God is made human, that sense of incarnation, is also, I think, crucial to this whole project. I love the story of the famous World War I chaplain, a military chaplain, who once said, he was nicknamed Woodbine Willie because he used to go around handing out cigarettes to the troops. And he once said, anybody who believes in the incarnation must be interested in drains. And that was obviously because he'd seen, people, suffering in the mud of the trenches, and had great compassion and realised that drains would ease the problem. So there is a sense too that in a way that would not be quite so true in Eastern religions, that the building itself is an incarnation of the divine, as opposed to simply what you might call a channel to the divine. There's some greater sense that the building itself is sacred, that the materials and so on. And I think what's interesting about the studio is you do have a great sense of materials. When you go to your studio, a lot of it's about materials, as opposed to some architects, I think, design a building and then think about the materials. Shape. The studio, they just produce the shape and then think, well, what material can we do? The studio, it seems to me, has a great sense of the materiality, from the start. Those of you with long memories will remember the 2012 Olympic cauldron that Thomas Heatherwick designed, with these copper leaves that each nation brought in to the Olympic Stadium and then plugged in, and then all these leaves came up to produce the Olympic flame. And I think the materiality of the copper, because the copper's part of this, that it's a substantial material. It's not, and each country was allowed to take theirs away with them. And you think that this is really interesting sense of the materiality, and you see that in the pews, the thought given to the woods and so on. So are there any other questions or points people would like to put? I'm sure there's lots. Yes. Hello.
Hi.
Would you like to stand up? Then we'll hear you more clearly. Thank you.
I got to confess I'm an architect, so forgive me. I think one of the really most extraordinary things about Worth, which is I would attest slightly different to La Tourette and to Longchamp and to the examples of a decade or so earlier, is that the lantern almost takes this 100-ton piece of structure and dematerializes it.
Oh, yeah.
It totally, it transforms, the light transforms what is a heavy structure into something which actually becomes a light veil to the space. And I think that to me is a transition of architectural thinking from where the modernists were at La Tourette, which is to do with the heaviness of mass brought together in light. And the idea and concept of colour and mass brought together in light. In the reinterpretation of that into a sort of mid-70s idea of what that modernism was going, where that was going, into the idea and concept of light as informing structure. And to me, when my son has been here at Worth for 5-7 years, and my two sons have been both here, and the joy of coming into the chapel, right, in the day and seeing that lantern is absolutely extraordinary. I just want to make one last point on this. Well, two last points. One is that when are we going to retile it, because it was meant to always be tiled as a roof. So that's the first question. And secondly is that I attest that the reason why I think architects look at the way the world is very similar to scholastic thinking and to the way in which I think we look at our places of worship is because actually for most of us we grow up in houses with carpets, with small spaces, but we are informed by the fact that we go into churches and we suddenly discover the wonder of light, discover the wonder of the acoustic environment, and it intrigues us. And I would attest that many architects have actually been created by that wonderment, right, from a very early age. And your story is a beautiful one because I absolutely resonates with me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I like that. It dematerializes the lantern. Other questions? Why don't we take a couple at a time? Yes, first of all here and then there.
So, two questions. I wanted to find out how much influence Abbot Victor actually had on the design of the church. And then my other comment is that I've been coming to Worth since the late 1970s, and when I walk into the church, I feel something that really special, which I don't experience in many other places. I mean, people call it like a thin place, I think. My parish church is actually very similar in that it's a circle.
Okay, thank you. So, question about Victor. Yes?
Do we know why the front pews are lower than the back pews? The reason behind that?
We'll come to that one maybe in a moment. So first of all, if you answer that one, the Abbot Victor had a massive influence on this church. He said he sometimes wakes up with a nightmare that people will call it Farwell's Folly because it was so big, and it was bigger than was needed. But actually now it's the right size. So he had a huge impact on that, and his personal relationship with Francis Pollen was very profound. And together, I think, and it's Fred's point, that it wasn't just Pollen's church. It was the church of the monastic community, so strongly expressed through Victor himself. I'd say that. So the question about the pews.
Tell me, you think the pews in the front are not as tall as the ones in the back?
No, they are set lower in the ground.
Oh,
It's the slope of the floor.
Why is the floor sloped?
Why is the floor sloped?
the floor sloping was a clear decision to make the centre important. And it all comes around like that to make it into a church rather than a dance hall. And I don't know that we actually made the pews different height.
No, I think it's the slope of the floor he's asking.
It just slopes, yeah. That slopes to focus onto the altar.
Yeah, because what it does is it means that by the time you get to the altar is raised up.
Okay.
So it's a way of the whole challenge in a church that is circular or square with an altar in the middle is to stop the eye bouncing to the wall. You have to hold the eye there, and the lantern does it, and so does the raised altar, which is a trick because it's not really raised vis-a-vis the entrance level. So it's all about, very cleverly, as you say, without people really noticing, all the emphasis being placed around the altar.
Thank you for the detailed explanation.
Yeah.
But there was an interesting thing when we did the things for the monks, that we made those high so the sound would reflect back and also create more of a space which is there.
Yeah.
I know one of the things that people have said to me is they regret that no longer the members of the general public can sit where the monks are. And I reflect on this, I think it's absolutely correct. You can't be a monk for a day. And that monks are monks, and they've, so to speak, earned their place in the park, and you are participating separately with what the monks are doing.
And by lowering down, we lowered down the level at which the monks were because they were higher up. It's brought down so that you're pretty well on the same level in that circle, but each in their own space within the one circle. And it was actually, wanting to delineate that quite clearly. Thank you. Yes? Take one here and then one over there. Yeah.
Now, first of all, say I really enjoyed that because coming to Worth Abbey the first time was extraordinarily emotional. And just sitting here and just seeing that. What actually made me emotional was the natural light that came in and how it came in.
Yeah.
I say that now as a structural engineer who worked with architects. And I feel very strongly, though, about nature. God created nature. And we just see it. That's why having something that's an organic shape in rectilinearity is actually quite significant. But there's an organic shape there. Yep. That's, I'm afraid, I disagree with you on as far as Gary is concerned. I think what he did with his forest and trees was fantastic.
It is fantastic.
Okay, thank you. Yes, here?
Just a little contribution. If you look
Could you stand up, please? People will hear you more clearly.
If you look at the screen, you see on the right there's a light on the wall.
Yep.
When Pollen was constructing his church, my wife used to come here a lot when she got friendly with him. And he said he designed in his head these lights, but he couldn't actually find them anywhere. No one made lights like this. And he was desperate for the right thing. And then he discovered that they were digging up some Victorian mains water pipes in the area. And we went to have a look, and they're exactly the colour and the size that he wanted. Right. So he bought a whole lot of them and cast them up to make these lights.
They're rusted pipes, and again, they're very clever because they don't draw too much attention to themselves on the wall. Yeah, thank you. What an interesting insight. Brother Theodore has a question, and then Michael. Theodore first, then Michael.
On the basis that we're on the edge of a monastic revival, I was very interested to hear that you thought that the monastery wasn't finished, that the Abbey Church was, and that the monastery was not. So given that there'll be hordes of young men joining in the next 10 years, of course, I'd be just interested to know what your thoughts are about that.
Okay,
Do you think the monastery
hang on. And then Michael, your question.
Yes, you realise, of course, the Liverpool Cathedral, although larger than Worth, we have a larger sanctuary and altar area than Liverpool does. Yeah. And they do not have 6 torches at Sunday Mass. There's nowhere to put them.
Thank you, Michael. There speaks the Master of Ceremonies. Thank you. Thank you for that observation. Your response to Theodore.
Do you think the monastery is finished?
I wouldn't be wearing this by day.
Okay, that's something. Thomas came to Worth and he turned to you and said, "Why do you live in an old person's home?"
That was his assessment.
And I think that is a summary of what it is. My position is that the building and rooms in the monastery are profoundly important, and they have a specific approach which is related to your belief in what you're doing, and you have not brought to terms in where you eat, where you sleep, the nature of what Benedict wanted you to do as a monastic group. And there's this, I mean, I've been reflecting on this a bit, extraordinary combination of being an individual and being a monk, being someone who, I'm told, you choose an abbot who is a spiritual leader, and the rest of the people say they are going to obey that person. This is an extraordinary dynamic community. I don't see that you've solved something which is collectively for what you're trying to do. I don't understand how you cope with these matters. I don't see why you have abandoned the potentials for rituals in where you eat, how you live, and these things would need to be resolved. Entering the monastery today is a depressing experience.
So Thomas expressed Fred's views even more directly. And, you know, he came up with a solution, which of course is fantastic and very expensive. But I think it goes like this. It's what you see is a necessary thing, but it goes like this. There are some monasteries that have all those pieces, which have failed and had to close. So having those things alone does not make you flourish as a monastery. But I think the interesting question you're raising is, can you flourish without them? That's
a false
way of putting it?
Yes. You don't need to flourish without them. What I can do with the things I have, how do I use them?
Yeah.
How do I describe the things which are there? What is it we're attempting to do within a monastic group?
Yeah.
These are the things which are pressing, which I don't see a demonstration of.
I think we do in the refectory. Are pretty good at ritualizing the refectory.
But when we went to Novi Dvor, which was a profound experience.
Yes.
This is just after communism, and so people could come back into the church. A majority of the novices and the monks were young.
Yeah.
When they sang in that church, they believed every word they sang. They did an antiphon when the two sides were singing. It was profound.
Yeah.
There was no doubt in anyone's mind that they believed every word, every syllable they made. I come here and there's a mumbling monk hoping their bits before they can do something else. If this is the core of what a monastery is supposed to be, that is where you come to life. That is where you express the reasons of why you've chosen this life that you're going to do. I don't see that.
Wow, okay. I think we could have a further discussion about that. But I think the whole thing of monastic life is highly ritualized, and how you express the ritual is going to vary from place to place. One more question, and I think we might be done, unless there's another one.
Oh dear. We'll never stop. I want to
just two more questions, and then we're done.
Go see the chapel in the church.
Yeah, please, quick. If you can be fairly quick and make it a clear question.
Following on from that last discussion, which I think was fantastic, and thank you for your honesty, Fred, and actually going back and back and back in your talk. But just before I ask my question, I'll just advise you that I was in Marseille about 3 weeks ago. I returned to the Dominican community there, and it was full of young men singing fantastically. So don't worry about monasticism. But what I do worry about is Western civilization, because I
wonder if I could stop you there. I hoped you might have a quick question rather than Western civilization.
It's a quick one.
Quick question, please.
Santiago Calatrava said Western civilization was dependent on Benedictine monasticism. So how do you respond to that?
Okay, just hold that, and then one more.
Yeah, mine is a very quick one. We've said a lot about this beautiful building from the inside.
Yep.
But when I first came, walking down from the car park in 1985, what I saw was the wonderful countryside beyond, but my eyes were turned and fixed on the church itself. Can you say a little more about the external appearance?
Okay, I'll deal with that one before I come to this one. You're absolutely right. The bit that I think is important now for the monastery is that they are taking the stewardship of 500 acres of land. But you see those 500 acres of land when you approach. And the real extraordinary thing was, I'm not going to show that inside, except by this amazing movement of light inside, blinding people in the audience. But I'm going to build something in the landscape. And the earlier design was a huge monument. It was going to fight the landscape. He found a way of making something which is comfortable, sitting in, and integral, and adding to it in a way which I think is really very profound. And the whole collection of thinking that I'm going to make a church which is enclosed, but we only approach it by seeing the landscape. I'm going to make its composition, a setting which you see from different points around it. I'm going to use the dome to achieve that. A combination of really interesting ideas which add to a very forceful matter.
Thank you.
I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Benedictines are one way of understanding the complex world we live in. The world is nothing like as simple as it was. Remember, in scholasticism time, all bodies of human knowledge could be summed and understood by a few number of people. That no longer is the case. We've atomized these things to such a stage that we have lost the ability to be comprehensive in anything like comprehensible. And therefore there's a bigger dilemma. I think the church has got to work out what it wants to do for this. It isn't going to solve all of them things, but it should still continue to be one of those things which is going to bring civilization to its happy conclusion.
I think
what I want us to do is to go see the church.
Yes, but let's end there. Thank you so much, Fred. Are you going to say a word?
I'm going to say a word because I think on behalf of everyone, I think Fred and Christopher, you've probably already intuited that you have the audience in your hands, and we could probably go on for considerably longer. But I'm not sure you'd all thank me for keeping you here longer than you were anticipating being here. But no, a very, very big thank you. When we worked, through Colin Amory's good offices, Christopher as Abbot was led to working with the Heatherwick Studio. Those of us who had the privilege of working with Thomas and with Fred and with the rest of the team, I think got an education in being creatively challenged. You've heard how Fred will express himself very honestly about how his take on things, and Thomas is the same. He's a very lively thinker and a hugely creative individual, just as Fred is. And I think it was in bouncing off those contrasting perspectives. We didn't agree with one another all the time. I don't agree with everything Fred's just said, but it's good to be challenged. It's good to be challenged because if you're never challenged, well, you do become complacent. So I think this morning has illustrated how that dialogue, Fred, that you took us into between design and faith is at the very heart of actually not just building a church, but building a monastery. And I remember vividly the project Christopher led us into was about creating a situation in which new members would want to join a monastery, would want to build a monastery, and our project for bringing that about was building a monastery. So the physical building of the monastery would be the lived metaphor for the creation of a new generation of monastics. And I think that hope still exists. So when you go, we'll have a collecting dish at the door, and if you give us enough money, we'll be able to build that fantastic monastery that Thomas Heatherwick designed for us, which we'd still love to have. It would be fantastic. But that's probably going to be a few years in the future. In a moment, I'll just ask you to express your thanks by putting your hands together. But if you are interested, at the back of the room and also in the bookshop upstairs, I believe, there are copies of Alan Power's book about Francis Pollen, very kindly donated to us by one of Francis' daughters, Claire. And thank you to the Pollen family both for being here this morning and for very kindly providing those books for us to be able to sell to you. And there are also copies of the biography of Abbot Victor Farwell, who was Francis Pollen's creative partner in the creation of the Abbey Church, and one or two other memorabilia objects that you might like to have a look at and think about buying as you go. So Fred and Abbot Christopher, thank you so much for a riveting morning.